Let me be clear, this is not a conspiracy theory, nor is it a history lecture. I'm not here to summarize a textbook. This is a government performance audit. I'm Bill from the Hill, and we're opening a 60-year-old cold case file using my background in the House and the Senate to look at the machinery of failure. While the leader of the free world was being driven into a death trap, the men sworn to protect him were violating every protocol in the book, starting with 190 proof grade alcohol. I've audited the White House logs, the Valet receipts, and the mechanical memos from Aberdeen Proving Grounds. The Warren Commission tried to sanitize. We're going through the receipts in chronological order to show you that the cover-up wasn't a conspiracy. It was a bureaucratic cleanup of gross negligence. Let's look at the evidence. Months before Kennedy came to Dallas, Oswald had a different target in mind. So why did Oswald pull the trigger on April 10, 1963? It was a calculated political hit. General Edwin Walker was a high-profile, ultra-conservative figure, and Oswald a self-proclaimed Marxist. He viewed him as a fascist. Oswald spent weeks planning the attack. Investigators found surveillance photos he took of Walker's home and a 10-point farewell note left for his wife. Oswald had a clear shot, but he missed. A tiny piece of wood that changed everything. His bullet clipped a wooden window sash, 9/16 of an inch thick. Because the Carcano is a low-velocity round, hitting that wood made the bullet tumble and break apart. We know this because of the evidence. The bullet hit the floral wallpaper at the 34-inch mark on the wall. According to the FBI, they only found a lead fragment weighing 4.1 grains. That is less than 3% of the bullet. The wood stripped the rest of it away. The results? The math is simple. Hitting that 9/16 inch piece of wood knocked the bullet 9 inches off course. Without that wood, the bullet would have hit Walker. He survived because Oswald's low-velocity round couldn't handle a sliver of wood. Well before the shots were fired in Dallas, the last line of defense failed a basic administrative test. At 12:30 a.m., 9 Secret Service agents went looking for food. When they couldn't find a place to eat, they settled for the bar at the Fort Worth Press Club instead. This wasn't just a late night one drink and done. It was the start of a total protocol collapse. According to the Warren Commission, Exhibit 1019, 9 agents, including most of the follow-up car detail, stayed and drank. They weren't just having a nightcap. They were downing scotch and water while the president's security bubble dissolved. When the law forced the press club to close, the detail moved to the cellar. The official story, they only drank fruit juice. But as an auditor, I look at the membership requirements. The owner, Pat Kirkwood, was well known for running the Cellar as a private after-hours membership club and offered VIP status to the agents. Because he did not have a liquor license, he operated under a bring-your-own-bottle policy, allowing agents to drink. They served setups, sugar-heavy mixers specifically designed to mask 190 proof grain alcohol. The manager, Dick Mackey, as the man on the floor during the entire morning hours of November 22nd, while he provided a sanitized statement to the FBI claiming everyone was sober. He was the primary witness to the timeline of the agent's departure. Witness there, Waldo confirmed that the fruit juice story was a fabrication. I see this designed for one thing: protecting their jobs and their federal pensions. Before the motorcade even reached the city, the protection was compromised. Agent Henry Ripka, a key member of the ship assigned to the Halfback follow-up car, was left behind on the tarmac at Love Field. His job was to be the human shield on the bumper during slow-speed movements, yet he was abandoned at the airport in a massive breach of protocol. Now that we've seen the failure in the personnel, we have to look at the failure of environment. When you're moving a high-value target through a city, You have to secure the path ahead. But as the motorcade approached the triple underpass, we see a complete collapse of basic high ground security. Standard operating procedures require that all overpasses be cleared of unauthorized personnel. Yet, as the limousine turned onto Elm Street, the triple underpass was crowded with people. There were at least 15 railroad workers and 2 uniformed police officers standing directly over the president's path. Not only was the high ground not secured, but the security bubble was non-existent. In any other professional environment, this would be flagged as a catastrophic administrative oversight. When you leave the high ground open, you are failing to provide basic requirements for executive protection. We have to ask, who authorized the motorcade to proceed towards an unsecured bridge, and why was that protocol ignored? According to Commission Exhibit 2110, the Secret Service acknowledged that the standard procedure was to have the police clear the overpass. The presence of those individuals on the bridge is a documented violation of that protocol. But the chaos wasn't just on the bridge, it was inside the motorcade itself. While the high ground was being ignored, the Secret Service agents in the Halfback car were reacting to the first shots. And that brings us to Secret Service agent George Hickey Jr. and the weapon that never should have been cleared for use in a crowded plaza. As the limousine moved down Elm Street towards the triple underpass, the breakdown in protocol shifted from a failure of planning to a failure of execution. This is where we audit the mechanical response of the Secret Service follow-up car, known as Halfback. As the first shots were fired, the driver of the follow-up car tapped the brakes. This sudden deceleration created a chaotic environment for the agents inside. Agent George Hickey, who was never a regular member of the President's permanent detail, reached for the AR-15 stored between the seats. But look at the professionals. In the photograph taken seconds after the first pop, the crowd is still smiling. But the Secret Service agents in the Halfback car are already jerking their heads around. They didn't think it was a firecracker. They knew the security bubble had just been breached. To establish a baseline for Oswald's weapon, we have to audit the second shot. The single 6.5mm Carcano round performed an incredible penetration. It entered the president's upper back, passed through his neck, and exited his throat. But it did not stop there. It continued forward, entering Governor Connolly's back, shattering his fifth rib, exiting his chest, passing through his right wrist, and finally embedding itself in his left thigh. Despite hitting 2 men and breaking a heavy rib bone, that bullet, Commission Exhibit 399, remained nearly pristine. This is the forensic proof of a low-velocity military round moving at 2,160 feet per second. It is designed to stay together. It is a standard military ammunition known as a full metal jacket. Generally, it is designed to penetrate rather than expand, complying with the requirement to not cause excessive suffering, which is why it's known as a Geneva Convention round. This shot proves Oswald's rifle was physically incapable of vaporizing a bullet into 40 fragments. When the rifle was found at 1:22 p.m., it was wedged between books, discovered by Deputy Weisman and Sheriff's Deputy Boone. It was hidden from view. 3 spent casings lay by the window, but inside the chamber sat a single live round. This is a forensic receipt that proves the rifle did not jam. For a live round to be there, the shooter had to physically cycle the bolt, ejecting the 3rd shell and loading a 4th. The rifle was cocked, loaded, and fully functional the moment it was abandoned. The rifle didn't stop. Oswald did. He worked the bolt out of habit to prepare for another shell, but he walked away before pulling the trigger. Beyond the ballistics, the trajectory of the final shot provides the ultimate administrative receipt. To believe the official story, you have to ignore the laws of geometry. From Oswald's perch on the 6th floor, the angle down to the limousine was approximately 21 degrees. This is a steep, downward flight path. However, when Howard Donahue reconstructed the path of the final shot, the entry and exit points on the president's head revealed it was only 11 to 11.5 degrees. This is a near horizontal path, which is physically impossible from the 6th floor. It is, however, a perfect match for a weapon fired from street level, specifically from the Halfback follow-up car trailing just feet behind the limousine. The shot didn't come from 60 feet up, it came from 5 feet behind. This investigation doesn't rely on theories. It relies on forensic audit of Howard Donahue. Donahue was a world-class ballistic expert who spent years analyzing the mechanical evidence of the shooting. His aha moment, as detailed on page 158 of Mortal Error, came when he examined the autopsy x-rays of the final shot. He saw the lead snowstorm of over 40 tiny fragments scattered throughout the brain. This created a massive problem for the official story. As we audited earlier, Oswald's 6.5mm Carcano was a low-velocity rifle moving at 2,160 feet per second. At that speed, a copper-jacketed bullet is a driller. It stays intact, but the x-rays show a high-velocity explosion. Donahue realized there was only one weapon in the entire motorcade capable of causing that fragmentation: the AR-15 Model 601 in George Hickey's hands. With a muzzle velocity of 3,240 feet per second, the AR-15 travels over 1,000 feet per second faster than Oswald's rifle. According to U.S. Army Ballistics Research Report 1217, that specific speed is the fragmentation threshold. One gun drills holes, the other turns lead into dust and fragments. To complete the audit of the shooting, we must address exactly how George Hickey's rifle discharged. The initial reports from WFAA TV in Dallas added to the chaos, with early broadcasts even claiming a Secret Service agent had been killed. While that wasn't true, it highlighted the confusion surrounding the follow-up car, specifically Hickey. He fell. Howard Donahue investigated two distinct mechanical possibilities for the discharge. The first was a slam fire, because the early model AR-15 601 used a heavy, free-floating firing pin. The sudden lurch of the car could have caused the pin to strike the primer with enough force to fire the weapon without a trigger pull. The second was an accidental trigger pull, as Hickey was tossed backwards by the driver tapping the brakes. Regardless of which mechanical failure occurred, Donahue's conclusions remained the same. No one else in the vicinity of Beeley Plaza possessed a high-velocity weapon. The lead snowstorm in the x-rays is a forensic fingerprint that points directly to the weapon in the Halfback car under the control of Hickey. An audit of the evidence must include more than just sight and sound. It must include the sense of smell. The only shooter was 60 feet up in a window. The odor of gunpowder would not have reached the motorcade participants at street level. However, multiple witnesses reported a distinct, overwhelming smell of gunpowder in the air as the Halfback car passed. Senator Ralph Yarborough, a veteran who knew the smell of Fordite, noted the odor at street level. Dave Powers and Kenneth O'Donnell, both sitting within feet of George Hickey, reported the same. Even Patrolman Joe Marshall Smith, standing near the triple underpass, smelled it. This is the sensory receipt of a street-level discharge. It confirms what the flight path and the lead snowstorm already proved. The third shot didn't drip from a window, it exploded in the middle of the motorcade, again pointing directly to George Hickey. To understand why the truth remained hidden, we have to follow the physical evidence, or rather, the systematic destruction of it. This is the chain of destruction, a series of administrative actions that began at Parkland and ended 30,000 feet in the air. While the doctors were fighting for the president's life inside Trauma Room 1, the Secret Service was already sanitizing the crime scene outside. Dr. Jed Rosenthal, a medical student at the time, arrived at the emergency entrance and specifically noted the presence of agents dealing with evidence around the vehicle. Even the head nurse of the emergency room, Doris Mae Nelson, testified to the Warren Commission that while the scene was chaotic, the Secret Service had already taken security measures over the car itself. Photographic negatives from the Dallas Times-Herald confirm what the witnesses saw: a bucket and a sponge at the ready. The agents were tidying the interior before a single forensic photographer could document the ballistic spray. Under the guise of dignity, agents installed the hard-shell plastic bubble top and fabric cover while the car was still at Parkland. That didn't just hide the gore, it forensically isolated the vehicle. It prevented any high-angle photos from the surrounding buildings that would have captured the fragmented lead snowstorm residue still sitting on the upholstery. The most damning evidence was destroyed during the flight back to Washington. Agent Sam Kinney, the driver of the Halfback car that followed the president, was the man in charge of the limousine on the C-130 transport plane. Kinney later admitted to finding a piece of the president's skull in the back seat. Instead of bagging it as evidence, he put it in his pocket. He then spent the flight scrubbing the interior to make it presentable for arrival. By the time the plane touched down at Andrews Air Force Base, the forensic fingerprint of a high-velocity AR-15 discharge had been physically wiped away. The chain was complete, the evidence wasn't lost, it was deleted. At Parkland Hospital, the president was already dead. But in a narrow corridor, a new battle is just beginning. On one side, you have the Secret Service, led by Roy Kellerman. Their mission is to get the president's body back to D.C. immediately. On the other side, Texas state law. In 1963, killing the president was not a federal crime. It was a state homicide. Under the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, that meant the autopsy was mandatory right there in Dallas. Medical examiner Dr. Earl Rose and Justice of the Peace Theron Ward literally blocked the door. Ward told the Secret Service, "He's just another homicide case as far as I'm concerned." He wasn't being disrespectful, he was following the letter of the law. But Kellerman wasn't having it. In his Warren Commission testimony, he described the confrontation with a crisp, unshakable certainty. When the hospital staff cited the law and insisted that the body could not be moved, his reply was cool, controlled, and absolute. He is the President of the United States, and we are taking him now. The Secret Service essentially bypassed local jurisdiction to maintain federal control. It was a collusion of authorities that would eventually change the law forever. However, Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, specifically the statutes regarding inquest and the jurisdiction of the medical examiner, it is mandatory inquest for death occurring under unnatural circumstances such as homicide. The body falls under the exclusive jurisdiction of the county medical examiner. But at the time, Kellerman should have been arrested. He was hiding the truth to cover up what actually happened. While the president's body was still in flight, the White House was already a revolving door for damage control. At 9:25 p.m. on November 22nd, the records show that Secret Service Director James Rowley meeting with Jerry Bent, the special agent in charge of the White House detail for the Secret Service. This wasn't a session for grief. This was the beginning of an administrative eraser. By 10:40 a.m. the next morning, LBJ met Hoover. The receipt for that meeting shows the focus was simple: centralize the investigation under the FBI and the Secret Service, cutting out the Dallas police and any independent forensic path. The lone nut theory was formalized in these rooms before Oswald was even charged with the murder of the president. We have to look at the work of Dino Bergioni. He was the CIA's top photo expert in their main lab. On the night after the assassination, Saturday, November 23, 1963, Dino was the man who created the official briefing boards for the CIA director using the original Zapruder film. In 1994, he told investigators that the film we have today is not the one he saw that night. He testified that that version in the archives was scrubbed to remove a massive cloud of white debris that proved the true nature of the head wound. In forensic auditing, the smoke is the receipt. The white puff seen at frame 313 is the chemical signature of the IMR 4475 propellant used in the AR-15 Model 601. This high-pressure stick powder created the velocity gap through three specific compounds. Nitrocellulose, the powder, the high-energy base that pushed the round to 3,300 feet per second. In the humid Dallas air, this extreme pressure created a visible vapor mist, a physical sign of high-velocity physics that the 1940s Carcano could not produce. Potassium sulfate, the mask, an additive used to hide muzzle flash so the agent wasn't blinded. It killed the fire but left behind solid salt particles that caught the sun, creating the opaque, bright white puff reported by witnesses. DNT, the timer, a burn rate coating that often fails to combust 100% in short-barreled weapons. This left the lingering grayish ghost haze near the follow-up car. The bureaucracy claimed one shooter and one rifle, but the chemistry doesn't lie. That white puff at frame 313, the administrative proof that a high-velocity weapon, never mentioned in the official story, was active in the motorcade. That snowstorm of fragments is the forensic receipt. That kind of damage doesn't happen with a low-velocity Carcano round. It is, however, the signature of a high-velocity weapon, the AR-15. The bureaucracy didn't hide just the files. They edited the crime scene on film to hide the physics of the weapon used. The autopsy wasn't a private medical exam. It was a room full of suits and brass. Agents Roy Kellerman and William Greer stayed in the autopsy suite the entire time. Their presence stifled the atmosphere, which Dr. Finnick testified that it prevented a thorough forensic examination. The Secret Service took immediate control of the most sensitive forensic data. Agents seized the undeveloped autopsy film and x-rays directly from the Bethesda photographers. This created a massive gap in the chain of custody before the records were turned over to the National Archives, which is why witnesses later testified that the official photos didn't match what they actually saw that night. From the blood-stained clothing to the magic bullet found on a stretcher, the Secret Service acted as primary handlers of physical evidence. Because they bypassed standard FBI and police protocols, the original integrity of the evidence was compromised before the investigation ever officially began. The lead doctors, James Humes and J. Thornton Boswell, were clinical pathologists. They were not forensic specialists. They admitted under oath to the ARRB that they had never performed an autopsy on a high-velocity gunshot victim. This was their first one, and it was the President of the United States. The chain of custody was broken on one night. Dr. Humes testified that he took his original autopsy notes and the first draft of the report home and burnt them in his fireplace. Every official report we have today is a later reconciliation. The real-time records are ashes. The morgue was packed with over 30 people, mostly high-ranking military brass. Dr. Pierre Finnick, the only forensic expert there, testified that doctors were restricted by the officers. When he asked why they weren't tracing wound tracks, he was told, "Those are the orders." The autopsy report lists the brain at 1,500 grams. That is a biological fraud. A healthy brain weighs 1,350 grams. After the massive tissue loss seen in the Zapruder film and confirmed in Dallas, it is physically impossible for the brain to weigh more than an intact one. The investigators changed the facts to fit the theory. The Warren Commission placed the head entrance wound low near the EOP. When the HSCA realized that the trajectory was impossible for a lone shooter, they simply moved the wound up 4 inches to the cowl. They moved the body to fit the bullets. Next, we have to look at the testimony of Saundra Spencer. In 1963, she was a petty officer in charge of the White House lab. Over the weekend of the assassination, specifically Sunday, November 24, 1963, Spencer was ordered to develop the autopsy photos. She testified under oath that the photos she processed showed a large hole in the back of the president's head. But the official photos in the National Archives show the back of the head is completely intact. When Spencer saw these archive photos, she stated, "These are not the photos I developed." This is the forensic receipt. The bureaucracy swapped the photos because the actual damage didn't match the low-velocity Carcano story. They edited the medical record to hide the physics of the impact and our high-velocity AR-15 round. We even have the Valet logs, the receipts for the physical items that the president had on him. Valet George Thomas and the White House staff had to account for every item, but look at what is missing, or administratively adjusted. The log, specifically Commission Exhibit 1017, shows that clothing was handled not by a coroner, but by military and Secret Service personnel. The suit coat and the shirt, items that proved the trajectory of the back wound, were cleaned through administrative channels rather than being preserved as forensic evidence. In the world of public administration, when you break the chain of custody, you aren't just making a mistake, you're creating a new reality. In a functional audit, you follow the fear. While the world watched a bronze casket arrive at Bethesda, 2 Navy technicians inside the morgue saw something the official narrative couldn't allow. Paul O'Connor and James Jenkins were told explicitly that if they spoke of what they saw, they would face a court-martial and rot in the brig for the rest of their lives. Why the threat? Because the x-rays showed what the technicians called a snowstorm of tiny metallic fragments. In a forensic audit, this is a mechanical signature. Oswald's 6.5mm rounds are designed to stay in one piece, but a high-velocity .223 round from the Secret Service's AR-15 shatters into a cloud of lead dust upon impact. They saw the snowstorm before the administrative cleanup began. O'Connor and Jenkins documented a massive blowout in the back of the head. While some say that implies a shot from the front, high-velocity physics suggest otherwise. A fragmenting round at 3,000 feet per second, just feet away from the president, creates an explosive pressure. That blowout wasn't a clean exit. It was a structural failure of a skull hit by a weapon the Secret Service wasn't supposed to be firing. The machine took over to hide the catastrophic professional failure. They silenced the technicians because the snowstorm proved the weapon wasn't a surplus rifle. It was a modern agency asset. They traded the truth to protect the agency's budget and reputation. The threat of a court-martial wasn't used to hide a coup. It was used to hide a disaster. They used the military law to ensure the paperwork matched the story. To understand the official narrative, you have to look at the administrative handoff. In the 96 hours after Dallas, Secret Service Director Rowley and the FBI Associate Director Clyde Colson met to decide who would control the evidence and the story. Rowley and Tolson met at the White House to negotiate a jurisdictional truce. Rowley agreed to hand over all the ballistic evidence and the limousine to the FBI. In exchange, the FBI agreed to stop highlighting the Secret Service's drinking and security failures, while the Secret Service stopped asking why the FBI never shared their Oswald file. By the afternoon of November 22nd, before a single bullet had been forensically matched, Tulsa received a memo from Assistant Director Belmont. The goal was clear: convince the White House and the public that Oswald acted alone. Raleigh went along with it to protect the agency's reputation from further audit. This wasn't a search for truth, it was a management of liability. They traded evidence for silence, ensuring the conviction machine had its target before the investigation even began. Hickey was never called to the Warren Commission. He wasn't sworn in. He was never cross-examined. Instead, 8 days after the funeral, he sat down to write a statement for his chief, James Raleigh. No lawyers, no judges, just an internal memo where Hickey and Raleigh set the scene for the commission. The commission excused him. They claimed he wasn't drunk at the Cellar or the Fort Worth Press Club the night before, even though he was there until the early morning. They protected the badge, and in doing so, they left the only other shooter unmasked. The agents knew what happened. They covered up what they could, but the truth is, it is actually there if you look at the statements. This would be regarded today as a Pinocchio or gaslight. Two versions of statements, zero answers, and zero accountability. George Hickey's rough statement, November 22, 1963. I then turned to look at the president's car, and at that moment I heard another shot, and a third shot. I saw the president's head practically explode. I then reached for the AR-15 rifle, which was on the floor at my feet. I cocked it and stood up to look for a target. By the time the cars were accelerating and I fell back into the seat, we then proceeded to Parkland Hospital. George Hickey's official statement, November 30th, 1963. I heard a loud report, which sounded like a firecracker. It appeared to come from the right and the rear, and seemed to me to be at ground level. I heard a second report, and then a third. I saw the president's head explode in a spray of blood and tissue. I reached to the floor of the car and picked up the AR-15 rifle, cocked it, and pushed the safety to the off position. The car lurched forward, and I fell back into the seat. I am certain that I did not fire the weapon. The administrative eraser didn't just happen in one office, it was a multi-state operation. On Monday, November 25th, 1963, while the president was being buried, the limousine was already being sanitized under the Secret Service guard. On Christmas Eve 1963, the car was delivered to Hess and Eisenhart in Cincinnati to begin Project 2998. This was the deep level purge. They stripped the midnight blue paint and replaced it with black. They added over 1,500 pounds of armor and replaced the entire blue leather interior. By the time the car was returned to service in June of 1964, the primary crime scene of the century had been engineered into a completely different machine. They didn't just clean the car, they armored over the physics of the assassination so no one could ever audit the truth again. By December 1st, 1963, the administrative eraser moved from the garage to the office. The executive mansion usher logs for that Sunday shows a flurry of activity. Secret Service inspectors weren't there to guard the new president, they were there to coordinate the briefing book for the Warren Commission. Think about that. Before the commission even met for the first time, the bureaucracy was already handing them a pre-packaged version of their facts. They decided which witnesses the commission should see and which summaries they would read. They didn't give the commission a crime scene, they gave them a brochure. This is how you control an investigation. You don't tell the investigators what to think, you just control everything they're allowed to look at. This isn't a theory, it's a filing system. On December 5th, 1963, the Warren Commission met for the first time. But look at the dates on the reports they were handed. Commission Documents 1 and Commission Documents 87 were already written. The bureaucracy didn't wait for the commission to investigate. They handed them a finished story. The White House usher log from Sunday, December 1st proved the huddle was already in motion. At 11 a.m., Inspector Thomas Kelly and Agent Gerald Fenn met with the National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy and Bill Moyers for 90 minutes. They coordinated the briefing books. They defined the scope. They defined the suspect. They defined the conclusion before the first witness ever took an oath. That is how you manage an audit. You write the final report first, then tell the auditors to find the evidence that matches it. While the paperwork was being finalized, the visual evidence was being re-indexed. On December 3, 1963, Secret Service Inspector Thomas Kelly, the same man who just huddled with the National Security Advisor at the White House, showed up at the National Photo Center. He wasn't there to watch a movie, he was there to oversee the creation of briefing boards. This is where the audit fails. The boards didn't show the raw, moving film. They were static panels of selected enlarged frames designed to support the lone assassin story before the commission ever saw the film in motion. The administrative eraser didn't just hide the files. They edited the view. They turned the crime scene into a slideshow, and Thomas Kelly was the man holding the projector. To audit a bureaucracy, look at who they destroyed. While the Dallas agents received promotions, full pensions, Abraham Bolden, the first black agent on the Presidential Protective Division, handpicked by JFK, went to federal prison. 3 weeks before Dallas, a sniper plot was uncovered in Chicago. Bolden reported agents drinking until 5 a.m. and ignoring security protocols. Instead of fixing the breach, the agency flagged the whistleblower. When Bolden tried to testify to the Warren Commission about these failures, he was intercepted and charged with a felony. The government star witness later admitted the prosecution pressured him to lie. It didn't matter, the conviction machine was already in motion. Bolden served over 3 years in a federal medical prison. In April of 2022, finally, he received a full presidential pardon, the ultimate administrative acknowledgement that he was telling the truth. Which is the bigger crime, a failure on Elm Street or a moral failure in the halls of justice? If you want to see the administrative eraser in the middle of a cold-blooded delete, look at January 22, 1964. The Warren Commission held an emergency secret session. They weren't talking about ballistics. They were talking about a report that Lee Harvey Oswald was actually a paid undercover informant for the FBI, badge number 179. According to the report from the Texas Attorney General, Oswald was being paid a flat rate of $200 a month. In 1963, that was the equivalent of $2,000 today. That wasn't gas money, it was a retainer for a man who officially had no steady income. A 54-page transcript was made of that meeting, but the bureaucracy ordered the court reporter to destroy the notes and the tape. They officially declared that meeting never happened for the public record. When the commission asked J. Edgar Hoover for the payroll vouchers to disprove the story, Hoover didn't provide an audit. He provided a denial. He told the commission his system precluded the possibility of such a payment. For an auditor, a denial is not a receipt. They deleted the minutes of their own meeting because the auditors were caught discussing the fact that their suspect was on the payroll of the people providing the evidence. I cannot make this shit up. I really can't. When you look at this tree in its entirety, you don't need a complex plot involving hundreds of assassins. You only need Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is that a tragic accident occurred. We had the Donahue investigation, proving a velocity gap, the lead snowstorm, that the 6.5 millimeter Carcano simply could not produce. Then come the branches of the administrative eraser, We see the chain of destruction begin at Parkland with the bucket and the sponge, documented by medical staff and photographers before the president was even cold, and the body removal itself. We see the bubble top and fabric cover used to seal the crime scene from forensic eyes. We see the C-130 where Sam Kinney scrubbed the interior and pocketed a piece of the president's skull. The centralization of the case under the FBI and the Secret Service to prevent independent oversight, and the LBJ Hoover Summit, where the lone nut theory was formalized to protect the agency's survival. They didn't protect a conspiracy, they protected their pensions and their pride. But the roots are still there, and the evidence is still the evidence. I'll be honest with you, I'm tired. This took a lot of work and a lot of digging. And when you look at the evidence, you have to ask yourself this question: why didn't they just tell the truth? The answer is simple, and it's found in the survival of the bureaucracy. Imagine the world in the 1960s. We were at the height of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis was fresh, and the Soviets were looking for any sign of American instability. If the government had come clean and admitted that the president was killed by a tragic accident within his own security detail, the Secret Service would have been shuttered overnight. Presidential protection would have likely fallen to the military, but more importantly, the American people would have lost faith in the government's ability to function. We would have been the laughing stock of the planet. While we were busy revamping our agencies or debating our Constitution to make sure it never happened again, the Soviets would have won the Cold War without firing a shot. And those agents involved in that atmosphere, they would have never survived long enough to make it to a trial. The bureaucracy did what the bureaucracy does best. It chose its own survival over truth. They pruned the tree so we would never see the trunk. Now, the question is, are you ready to see what else they filed away? I have several high-level FOIA requests out right now. And if and when those receipts hit my desk, I'm bringing them straight to you. This tree has more branches. We're going to climb every single one of them. Join the audit, subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a comment below. The bureaucracy has had 60 years to tell their version. It's our turn to look at evidence. I'm Bill from the Hill. Thanks for watching.